The first time I heard it, I thought it was my own heartbeat. You know that pulse in your head when everything is too quiet, or when you're too alone. I figured it was the quiet hum of my thoughts, a noise in my skull that I'd grown too used to ignoring. But then, when the quiet didn't end, I started to wonder if maybe there was something else in the silence with me. I'm getting ahead of myself though. Let me start from the beginning. I'm Michael Herrick. I used to be the type of guy who never thought too much about danger. I spent my days working a desk job, the typical American routine: wake up, work, eat, sleep, repeat. You get the idea. But that was before the cave. Before everything changed. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway with some old friends, a trip to get out of the grind and enjoy a little adventure. The kind of adventure people talk about at bars or social gatherings, with a hint of exaggerated bravado. We were just going hiking, following some obscure trail up near the Appalachians. You know, the kind of place where you're more likely to get lost than to see another human soul. The trail was remote, but that's what we wanted. The quiet. The isolation. But not the kind of isolation I'd soon find myself stuck in. That kind of isolation was the sort that swallowed you whole and didn't let go. I should have known when we started veering off the marked path that something was wrong. The woods were too still, too silent. No birds, no animals, no wind rustling through the leaves. Just the faint hum of the world turning. At the time, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. But looking back, I realize it was more than just nerves. It was the air itself, thick and oppressive, like the earth was holding its breath. There was something hidden in those woods, something that shouldn't have been. We didn't realize how deep we'd gone until we reached the ridge. The drop below was steep, jagged rocks, a far distance to the bottom. But there was something else too, a hole, barely visible from where we stood. The earth had given way, leaving a cavernous gap in the ground. It didn't seem like a natural cave. No, not like the kind of cave you see in pictures. This one was more of a wound in the earth. A gaping, angry wound. My friend Matt, ever the daredevil, made a joke about how it looked like a place where people went to disappear. We laughed, but even as I stood there, something about the sight of that hole tugged at me. There was a curiosity in the pit of my stomach, but also a strange hesitation. It was as if the ground beneath me knew something I didn't, something that made it whisper in a voice I couldn't quite hear. Before any of us could think twice about it, Matt was already sliding down the edge, his voice echoing through the hollow air. He made it look easy, like the drop was no big deal. I watched him disappear into the dark, swallowed by the shadows below. And like idiots, we followed him. The climb was treacherous, but we were too caught up in the excitement of doing something out of the ordinary to pay attention to the danger. The walls of the cave were slick, smooth in places, rough in others, but the further down we went, the more unsettling it became. The air grew colder, the atmosphere heavier, as if the space was holding something back. By the time we reached the bottom, the strange noise had started again, the hum, the thrum in my skull. But this time, it wasn't just in my head. It felt like it was coming from the very walls of the cave. A distant roar, like the growl of something massive, somewhere far beneath the earth. Dude, did you hear that? I asked Matt, but he just waved me off, laughing, his voice echoing off the rock. Probably just the wind, he said. But I didn't believe it. We pushed on, deeper into the cave. The roar grew louder, more distinct, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to shake the ground beneath us. I should have turned back then. But Matt's excitement, the pull of the unknown, made me stay. It's funny how easily fear can be masked by bravado. The deeper we ventured, the harder it became to breathe. The air thickened, and I started to feel nauseous. My thoughts became fuzzy, disconnected. I could hear the sound of my own pulse pounding in my ears, louder than the roar that echoed around us. The others didn't seem to notice, but I did. Something wasn't right. Then we came upon it. A massive chamber opened up before us, one that stretched far beyond what any of us could see. The space was enormous, the walls cracked and jagged, the ceiling impossibly high. In the center of the chamber, a large pool of water reflected the dim light of our torches. But it wasn't the water that caught my attention, it was what lay beneath it, the thing in the pool. I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen, not in movies or books, or even in nightmares. It was vast, shifting in the dark, its shape constantly warping in ways I couldn't comprehend. It was a mass, a horrible amalgamation of shadow and something else, something tangible and yet not, and it was moving. The roar was no longer distant. It was right on top of us, vibrating in the air around me, shaking the walls, the ground, everything. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I felt a sudden, desperate need to get out, to run. But I was frozen, rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away from the thing in the water. Matt, as if sensing my hesitation, turned around to face me. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice too calm, too steady. I didn't answer him. I couldn't. My throat was dry, tight, my body trembling. I could hear the others moving behind me, but I couldn't bring myself to look at them. All I could do was stare at the creature. Then I saw it. It moved. A ripple spread across the surface of the water. The shape beneath it shifted, and in that instant, I knew that thing was alive. It wasn't just a shadow, a trick of the light. It was real. And it was watching us. I finally turned and screamed for us to leave. But as I spun around, I realized Matt was gone. I didn't see him leave, didn't hear him scream. One moment, he was there, and the next, he was just gone. Vanished without a trace. The roar intensified, and that was when I ran. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The terror was so thick in my chest, it was suffocating. My lungs burned as I tried to push my legs to move faster, but the ground seemed to stretch beneath me, each step feeling heavier than the last. The air was suffocating, and that damned roar, louder now, almost deafening, pulsed through my bones like an electric shock. I couldn't hear Matt anymore. At first, I thought I had just outrun him, but then I remembered. He'd vanished. Gone. 1 second he was standing beside me, and the next, he was, what? Consumed. Taken? There was no trace of him, no sound of his footsteps, no echo of his voice. I had no idea where he'd gone. I didn't care. All I could focus on was that horrible, otherworldly noise, as if the cave itself had come alive, angry and hungry. I wasn't thinking clearly. I didn't know what direction I was going in, or whether I was even still on the path we'd come in on. All I knew was that I had to get out of there. I rounded a sharp bend in the tunnel, my flashlight flickering like a heartbeat, casting mad shadows on the walls. I was gasping for air now, my head pounding, but the sound, the roar, was still there. It wasn't fading. It was like it was following me, stalking me, and it seemed to be getting closer. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I could feel my pulse racing. Then I heard it. A noise behind me. A scrape. A shifting, like something moving through the dark. I froze. My blood ran cold. I spun around, my flashlight sweeping the cavernous tunnel. The beam of light landed on nothing. There was nothing there. Just the same jagged walls of stone, winding off into the darkness. But the noise had been real. I knew it had been. My breath was shallow, my heart hammering in my chest. Another scrape. Closer this time. I snapped my head back toward the direction I had been running, but the tunnel ahead was still dark, empty. A chill washed over me, creeping down my spine like icy fingers. I was being followed. There was no question now. I had heard it, felt it. Something, or someone, was behind me. But I couldn't stop to look. I just couldn't. I kept running. I don't know how much time passed. The minutes blurred into each other, time seeming to stretch and contract like I was trapped in some horrible loop. My thoughts were disjointed, my mind racing with fragmented images, the horrible shape in the water, Matt's sudden disappearance, the sound of something huge shifting beneath the earth. I kept telling myself to focus, to find a way out, but my body wasn't listening. I stumbled. I couldn't breathe. I was starting to feel dizzy, lightheaded. My limbs felt like lead, heavy and useless. Suddenly, I skidded to a halt. The passage ahead of me had narrowed, the tunnel becoming tighter, almost suffocating. The walls were closing in. I could feel the pressure of the stone, the weight of the earth above me. I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, but the ground beneath my feet felt like it was trembling. A rumble. A growl. And then that awful roar again. It was closer now. Too close. Too damn close. I could see something in the shadows. A movement, too quick to be human, a shape that didn't belong in a cave, a shape that didn't belong in this world. It was massive, nearly filling the entire passage, its eyes glistening faintly in the dark. The shape was dark, almost formless, a creature that seemed to shift with every blink of my eyes, an entity that had no right to exist. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My flashlight flickered one last time and died, plunging me into an impenetrable darkness. I heard it before I saw it. The scrape of claws against rock. The wet slithering sound of something dragging itself along the ground. The air was thick with a stench of rot, like something dead and decaying. I didn't need to look to know what was coming. I could feel it. I could feel its presence like a weight pressing down on me. My feet moved, but they weren't moving fast enough. The thing behind me was gaining ground. It was real. It was there. I ran again, but this time, I didn't know where I was going. The walls of the cave closed in around me, the passage narrowing even further. There were no turns, no paths to take. The only thing ahead was a dead end. I could hear the things breathing now, slow and steady, like a predator savoring the chase. It was close. Too close, and then, I saw it. A shape looming in the dark. Not a creature, no, not at first. It was a hole, a gap in the rock wall, large enough to crawl through. It was a chance, a desperate chance. I didn't think. I didn't even hesitate. I threw myself toward the hole, scrabbling, clawing at the jagged stone, forcing my body through the narrow opening. The creature was right behind me. I could feel its breath on the back of my neck. The sound of its claws scraping against the walls was deafening, and the air around me seemed to vibrate with its presence. But somehow, I made it through. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The tunnel beyond the hole was small, cramped. My chest was tight, the air in here thin, but I had to keep moving. I pushed forward, ignoring the pain in my muscles, the ache in my bones. I didn't stop. I couldn't. The roar had stopped, but it was still out there. Still hunting. I kept going, each step feeling like the last. But the further I moved into the darkness, the more something began to shift in my mind. The walls seemed to be closing in again, but it wasn't the cave doing it. It was something else. Something inside me. I don't know how long I'd been crawling, how much time had passed since I'd lost track of Matt, but then I heard it, another sound, faint but clear. A whisper. A voice. It was Matt. I didn't know how, but I knew it was him. His voice, muffled and distant, calling my name, but it wasn't a rescue. I knew it wasn't. It was something else, and that's when I realized the truth. Whatever I had fallen into wasn't just a cave. It was a place that didn't belong in our world, a place that distorted everything it touched. And Matt hadn't been taken by some creature. No, he'd become something else. Something that belonged in the dark. I had to keep moving. I had to get out of there before it was too late. Before I, too, became part of the cave's twisted hunger. I could feel it. The weight of the darkness pressing against me, suffocating me with its silence. The whispering voice, Matt's voice, lingered in my ears, growing fainter, distorted, like an echo fading in and out. But even as it faded, I couldn't escape the feeling that it wasn't just Matt calling to me. It was something else. Something darker. Something that had taken him. The walls of the cave were changing. I had no other explanation for it. The jagged stone that had once been sharp and cold seemed to soften around me, shifting, undulating as though it was alive, like the cave was breathing. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of decay. The rock under my hands felt warm now, like I was pressing against the ribs of some massive beast. I couldn't tell how long I had been crawling through the darkness. Hours. Days. Time didn't feel real anymore. The further I went, the more disoriented I became. My thoughts felt fragmented, as if they were slipping away from me. The cave was warping, twisting my perception of reality. I didn't know if I was losing my mind or if this place, this horrible, cursed place, was messing with my head. Maybe both. I didn't know what I was running from anymore. I was being chased, yes. But by what? The thing I'd seen in the shadows. Or was it something deeper? Something I had yet to understand. The voice, Matt's voice, kept calling my name, over and over again. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't go back. I wouldn't. I rounded another corner, my hands slick with sweat, my legs trembling from exhaustion. The tunnel had become even narrower, and I was struggling to move through it, feeling the weight of the earth pressing down on me, like the entire mountain was trying to swallow me whole. I didn't know where I was, or where I was going. But I had to keep going, and then I saw it. A faint light. Faint, but it was there, at the end of the passage. A promise of escape. Of freedom. It was the first real light I had seen since I fell into this nightmare, and it was like a beacon, drawing me in, pulling me forward. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the way my muscles screamed in protest, ignoring the cold sweat that poured down my back, but as I neared the light, I began to hear something else. A sound that I hadn't heard before, footsteps, not my own. Someone else's. They were getting closer. Closer, and that's when I saw it. A figure, standing just ahead, bathed in the faint light, blocking my way. My heart skipped a beat. It was Matt. Or at least, it looked like him. His face was gaunt, hollow, his skin pale and stretched tight over his bones. His eyes were wide, empty, pupils dilated in a way that shouldn't have been possible. He didn't look human. He didn't look like my friend. He looked like something that had been twisted by the cave, reshaped into something unrecognizable. Something hungry. Mike, he rasped, his voice weak, but it was unmistakable. It was Matt. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. My instinct screamed at me to run, to turn around, to get away from him. But my body wouldn't listen. I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot, as his twisted form inched closer, his movements unnatural, like a marionette controlled by some unseen force. The air around me felt wrong, thick and choking, like the very atmosphere was twisting itself around me. Mike, he repeated, his voice low, hollow, as though it had been dragged from the very pit of the earth. It's so close. You don't understand. It wants us all. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask what he meant, but no sound came out. The roar, no, the growl, it was back, louder than ever, echoing through the tunnel, vibrating the ground beneath my feet. It was almost as if the cave itself was alive, aware of our presence, and it was coming for us. Matt took another step toward me, his eyes never leaving mine. He reached out a hand, a skeletal, twitching hand, and I could feel the temperature drop as it neared. It's in here with us, Mike, he whispered, his voice shaking. It's in all of us now. I stepped back, my legs trembling, my breath shallow, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from him. And then, I saw it, the thing behind him. A shape in the darkness, massive and shifting, something that shouldn't have been there. It was a vast, amorphous mass, dark as the void itself, crawling with tendrils and eyes that blinked in and out of existence. I couldn't understand it, couldn't comprehend what I was seeing, but I knew, without a doubt, that it was the source of the roar, the source of the darkness, and it was coming for me. I turned and ran, as fast as I could, pushing myself beyond the point of exhaustion, my heart thundering in my chest. The tunnel was endless now, the walls pressing in, and the growl grew louder, the sound reverberating through my bones. I wasn't going to make it. I knew I wasn't. Whatever it was, whatever had taken Matt, whatever had claimed this cave, I could feel it closing in around me, a presence that would never let me escape. I didn't know how long I ran. It could have been seconds, it could have been hours. But as I neared what I thought was the end of the tunnel, a blinding light washed over me. The light of the outside world. I thought I had reached the surface, that I had made it out. But when I reached for the opening, my hands scraped against cold, unyielding stone. There was no exit. I was still in the cave. The roar was deafening now, the ground trembling beneath me. The thing behind me was so close, I could feel its presence pressing in from all sides. I felt something tugging at my mind, a whisper at the edge of my consciousness. Matt's voice was there again, but it wasn't just his voice. It was a chorus of voices, all pleading, all begging for something. Something I couldn't understand. But one voice stood out from the rest, louder than the others. It was mine, help us. The last thing I felt before everything went black was the cold embrace of the darkness.